Well, hello again, and if you've seen one of my previous videos where I talked about a steak in a French restaurant, this is where I started, and so I thought maybe this would be a good place to pick up another thread and show you a little update. And also it ties into the French author Voltaire and the story Candide that he wrote, and how he, at the end of the book, it's not really a spoiler alert, but there's a phrase called tending to your garden, and this is what you find Candide doing at the end of his story. It doesn't really make much sense unless you go on a journey, whether that's his journey or your own individual journey. The idea is maybe similar to tidying your room or keeping your own house in order. Tidying your room a la Jordan Peterson, or just getting your own house in order, which is, I actually don't know where that phrase comes from, but I suspect it probably comes from one of those sort of noble houses that might have been mentioned in some Shakespearean play. It'd be amazing if it was King Lear, but could be Hamlet, could it be Macbeth? That's not what I'm here to talk about today, so I won't get distracted, or I won't distract myself by thinking about that. But here's an update anyway. Tending to my own garden. I haven't been doing much tending to it because what you're supposed to do is thin it. That's what the instructions say on the seeds. Thin this out. So I suppose it's to give them room to grow. My attitude to this is, look, it's an experiment. I'm very helpless really in that way. I wonder how helpless or proficient other people are in this way or other ways, because I couldn't feed myself with my own skills if my life depended on it. very well may do. So I'm not a hunter, nor am I a farmer. So I'm just, maybe not even a scientist, but this is like, real world science, where you do something, you observe its actions or the results of your actions, and then you might learn something. That's what science is, gathering a bit of knowledge for yourself. So, but while I'm at it here, this is what I want to grow. These are the seeds that I planted. And the funny thing is that I did plant these seeds, but not this year. The seeds for these things last year. And my conclusion with these is that whether I try to grow them, I think I'd need to get into hydroponics, which is an interesting word, but I won't get too deviated into it. Hydro meaning water, and ponics, I think, is like coming from the word pont for a bridge. So you're maybe, this is even a drawbridge, but a bridge to carry water or draw water from the bottom back up to the top again, which is what I understand hydroponics is, to recirculate water within a greenhouse, because there's just not enough humidity, I would say, for these things, as well as enough heat and sunshine. So that's these leaves here. What I see with these is that these grow massively, or what's the word I should say, plentifully, but they don't bear fruit. And the fruit should be peppers, as in bell peppers. But I don't think the climate here is hot enough for that. Probably not nearly. And even in warmer climates, it's not. The fruit might actually taste nicer, as in the green and yellow and maybe even red peppers, which I think might be just different stages of the fruit ripeness. They don't really grow that big, so you probably do need to invest in not only the right techniques, but perhaps even fertilizer, and control the conditions even then. But what I did plant in addition to these peppers, so these just came back this year. The seeds were left in them, so look, they're fairly hardy, but I think they're not going to reach maturity, let's say, which I often feel is what I am. Maybe I can't say that I'm growing bigger, but I'm sticking around for now anyway, or coming back every year. But these leaves here, these ones that are more like, I don't know, spade shaped rather than lily leaf shaped, so these ones here should be runner beans, and that's why I've put in these sticks, so that they might grow up them. Here's some more in isolation. But look over here, they've just come back, and they'll turn into long runner shoots. But what they're obscuring, they're growing like a weed even though they're not. What they're obscuring is these here, which I think are going to be, I think I planted cabbage. Maybe I planted lettuce, but I think it's cabbage. But they're getting crowded out, so I'll get on to what I'm trying to get onto now, which is actually something related to youth and old age. So I introduced my granny in a previous almost or roughly hour-long, I'll say a talk, for want of a better word, which I didn't manage to quite stick to one point, but I left it up because there's something or a couple of things in there that I might have, if not come to a point exactly, been in the periphery of a few points. And I don't know if I mentioned, but one of the phrases, my granny used to, my mother's mother used to make me do a lot of chores, and if I wasn't helping her cook the dinner or clean her house in some way or tend to the garden, help her do weeding. So that's what, one of her phrases came from. I said to her, she was maybe getting frustrated with me or giving out to me. Maybe not getting frustrated, but she gave out to me that I was, supposed to help her weed her garden. But I was pulling up plants thinking they were weeds, and she was saying, they're not weeds, don't pull those up. And I became frustrated, really, and I said, well, how do you know the difference between a weed or not? Now, maybe that engaged her philosophical brain and wondered whether she could give me a single line definition of what a weed is. And I think that's an interesting thing to think about. Just like what is the definition of life? I don't believe that there's a one-size-fits-all definition of life. I remember in school they would give us certain definitions, like if something is living, then it reproduces, or if something is living, then it... Now, I'm trying to think of the scientific word for breathes. Breathes. It's not asphyxiates, that's to choke to death. I think it's to respirate. Whether that's breathing in oxygen and giving out carbon dioxide or vice versa. So a tree is alive in that sense because it takes in carbon dioxide, gives out oxygen. But there's other things maybe that, maybe that's it, but maybe there's other things that you could say, well, something needs to have the ability to reproduce before it's alive. I don't know. Is a stone alive? Well, maybe it moves, maybe it reproduces in its own way. What is the definition of reproduction? Let's not get into that too much there. That's a deviation that I'm not intending to be the focal point of what I'm trying to get at here. This may be a long one, by the way, but we'll see how we go. Anyway, what she said to me was, well, okay, a weed is maybe just something that is growing in a place where you don't want it to be. So that it's quite good definition. It doesn't quite cover everything, because what I've noticed about things that are weeds is that they tend to grow without any need for cultivation, and they don't necessarily bear any fruit that's useful to human beings. So from our perspective, something might be a weed, but to something else, another animal, it may not be. Or there may be uses or benefits of some plant or flower that we aren't aware of, From a medical point of view, it could be good for our health, or it could have some kind of liquid or fluid, or balm, or I'm trying to think of a better word that you could use for an ointment, like aloe vera. That a lot of these plants similar to aloe vera have a substance inside them which is good if you put it on the skin. It could be healing or just moisturizing. But not every weed is bad, and maybe there isn't any weed that's bad particularly. I mean, this bramble here, it would bear fruit, either, well, probably something like a blackberry, and you could eat that, or you could make jam out of it. So I'm not getting rid of it, even though I will have to keep it away from everything else here. But I thought I'll leave it for now. And then things like buttercups here, I don't know exactly what use they are, but they're very pretty, and they are a weed, but they look lovely in a meadow. There's a few more there along the grass, and if I would cut the grass, then they wouldn't be there anymore along with the daisies, but they look beautiful. And I remember when I was much younger, you probably all remember the little house on the prairie in the opening scene, and the little girl running down through the meadow, and it was just so wholesome, And I remember I took a shortcut across some fields when I was a kid during one summer, and a girl that I was going out with, I don't know if that's a phrase that is universal, but she was my girlfriend. But we didn't go out to restaurants because we were probably, I think I was probably 15, and she was really, really beautiful. She looked like, she had long flaxen blonde hair, you know, yellow hair, or colour of straw, but her hair wasn't like straw. It was, you know, soft, and it fluttered in the breeze and that kind of thing. She looked exactly like, there used to be commercials for a certain shampoo where this sort of, I don't know, like, I don't want to exactly say like Scandinavian or that kind of a look of a girl, where she would, you know, well, the ad showed her putting her hair into a stream, a clear, clean stream, and flicking her hair back, and the hair would, you know, be, you know, cascading with water droplets and all this kind of thing, you know. So anyway, she looked like that, and so I was, of course, head over heels in love, and you know, you tend to act a bit silly, like, and you don't mind sort of like whatever might impress her or whatever, you know. But I remember running through the fields, and then when she was waiting at the bottom of this field, I sort of did, you know, sang this do 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 do. I'm not singing it very well, but anyway, you know, the opening music to it, even though I was a boy and maybe she wasn't running to me so much, but I didn't mind. I was sort of making a fool of myself, but running through the meadow like that. So you couldn't run through the meadow like that unless there was buttercups and daisies. But look, let me not get distracted too much, but what I do want to talk about is reminiscing about youth and beauty, and then old age and how it fades, and then who are we who remain in our minds or in our heads, the concept of the physical body and the person, and either the separation between the two, or and I'm trying to think of the right word, the connection between the two, or the amalgamation of the two. So yeah, why I introduced my grandmother, and I'll show the picture again if I can. As a young girl, she was in this picture something like, I would guess, 10 years of age, maybe less, maybe a little bit more. But probably a little bit less, and she's standing beside her father. So my great-grandfather, and you know, he's looking very severe, austere, stern, and I'm thinking, my God, now he's an adult, but he in that picture is probably younger than I am now, and I'm thinking, oh, I would be such a disappointment to him. And all I'm presuming that based on is because he looks like he wouldn't tolerate any kind of silliness or messing about. But that's one photograph, and you probably, of course, in those days, whenever it was, I imagine it would have been, well, early 20th century. For the photographic technology at the time, something about the shutter speeds and the apertures, you had to stand still, and they put a background behind you, and you know, they said better not to smile in case your smile wanes. Just hold a normal pose or something like that. So if you happen to have a resting face that doesn't look very friendly, which I don't think most people do, then you're going to come across as looking unfriendly to your great grandson, who will never have known you other than that. It's a strange thing. But even if you go back further than just the early 20th century, did I say 19th earlier? I meant early 1900s. I often get confused on that. I still can't teach my way out of that to myself, you know? That little mental trip up that I always have with that. That the 20th century was the 1900s. The century in which I was born. And now I'm old, you see. Now I'm in the 21st century, and I'm old. And I still think I'm young then. And I remember even in my 20s, I kept thinking, well, I'm really still a teenager. Like when I was 20, 21, I was thinking, 19, 20, 21, what's the difference? Although back then, the difference between 19 and 21 to me seemed significant. And I'm pretty sure that if a girl was 19 and I was 21, certainly if she was 17 and I was 21, I would have thought, oh, there's a huge gulf there. That she would be a child and I would be well, I won't say the word, but I'd be far too much of an adult. Which, I'm certainly not trying to create a controversy here, but looking back now, I see that as a silly way of thinking anyway. I'm actually just a little bit distracted here because I see this here and I thought maybe I'd show this. This is really beautiful. And it's a wild flower as well, and I can't really tell you what it is, but it might be hawthorn, but that's only a wild guess. I don't know, no pun intended. But anyway, let me come back here and I'm going to sit down again and have that as a little background and talk some more. So, where was I? Yeah, I mean the difference between, I suppose, I've been doing a bit of reminiscing about when I was young, but when I was also not so young. And also thinking about girls that I had relationships with. I keep nearly saying went out with. And that's just a phrase that whenever I was young that we said all the time, and I don't even know if kids say that anymore, I used to laugh when adults would say, oh yeah, she was doing a line with him. I'd be doing a line. You're so out of touch. How square I thought adults were, And every generation that comes up afterwards always thinks that adults don't know anything. And are square, meaning like that they're not familiar with the things that kids get up to, whereas really they've been there and done that, and there's no way of explaining to a kid, here, listen, you don't know, and you don't know anything really, and you think maybe as well when you're a kid that girls know the answer to everything and they have all their secret meetings and share all their secrets, which I suppose in a way they kind of do. I'll let you all know that guys find it very uncomfortable to talk to each other about, not just the obvious mechanics of things, but certainly the psychological underpinnings to everything. They're terrified of coming across to each other as being overly sensitive, or, God forbid, that they might have, feelings about love other than just wanting to have some kind of transient physical pleasure, It's a strange thing, and I think that's part of the brainwashing that guys have. It's one of many ways that guys aren't able to communicate with each other and therefore figure out, whether they're all alone or whether their experiences are in fact very common. So, just getting back to my grandmother for a minute, I thought it was interesting to introduce my grandmother as being a girl who was 10 years old, because something that when I was a kid, and this speaks to the idea that when you're born you just think, oh, now I'm here. Well, anything that happened in the past is irrelevant. It's got nothing to do with me. I'm here now, and it's a very, well, maybe not quite solipsistic, but self-centered. Solipsistic meaning I don't know anything outside of me, but that's more like, there's more aspects of that from a philosophical point of view. That's more like, I think therefore I am, but I don't know if anybody else thinks, and everybody else could be a figment of my imagination, and how would I know if they weren't? Because it could be all just projections of my own thought. So it's not entirely solipsistic in that sense, but it is self-centered, and part of, I think, the process of life is to not just die as far as your physical body goes, for it to wear out, but also for your ego, which seems to be a very destructive force and a very poisonous force. It's a poisonous force to your own discovering who you are, really. It supplants your own character, and you think that your ego is you. And I wonder, maybe some people might have felt like me sometimes, that I'm just almost like a small little Lilliputian, a little puppet inside my own head. Not a puppet master maybe, or perhaps a passenger inside a cave inside my own head, looking out through these apertures in the eye sockets, viewing the world as though it's a movie and I'm just moving the avatar around. So it's a curious thing, and I can say on the one hand, my personality, who I am, the memory of me, my character, was me all along throughout my life, as far as I remember having thoughts. And yet I'm a different person now. So you grow, you change, and yet you remain the same. it's a contradiction. It's I'm trying to think of the poetic word. It's not exactly irony. Maybe I'll think of the better word for contradiction later. But life is made up of these. I think everything, in the way that life can be thought of as, twin pillars and everything in between, the yin and the yang, life is also a self-contradiction, and everything in it. Things that appear to be oxymorons, that's it. Things that appear to be self-contradictory. But it's almost like the contradiction shows the truth of the matter as well. So it's a curious thing. When you're born, you think you're young. And I always thought, I know this is a very obvious statement to make, but let me make one of the central points that I want to make here. I suspect other people might have also fell for the same logical fallacy without realizing that they were even thinking something. It's an assumed thought, or it's an unconscious assumption. So it's jumping to a conclusion without even having recognized that a thought process has taken place in reaching that assumption. So when I was born, I just assumed that my parents were always my parents. In other words, the age that I pictured them at or perceived them to be at, they were always that age. And then one day I came into the world and my parents' job was to look after me. I didn't realize that they had once been young and had to learn things and were children like I was. And even if they told me that they were once my age, I'd say, yeah, well, in your dreams, No, they were my parents and it was their job to look after me. And that was that, And it was also their job to not only explain everything to me, but to know everything about the world and to tell me about it, Whereas not only had they had to learn everything themselves up until that point, but as they said as well, like children don't come with a handbook or an instruction manual, so they had to learn how to be parents as well. And the same for their parents and their parents. So what I'm trying to say is that I thought that when, maybe nice old ladies, or maybe sometimes some not so nice ladies would, go, oh yeah, cuckoo baba, coochie baba, look at him there, isn't he lovely? I always thought that old ladies, and old men, but old ladies, grandmothers, were always old ladies, but they weren't. I know this is a blindingly obvious statement to make, but I wonder how many people might say, yeah, I know. I do sometimes find it difficult to picture it, even though intellectually I know it. So I think there is probably a great many things that we, on the one hand, know from a factual or intellectual or informational point of view, we know it, but from a sort of a feeling, emotional, and having it click into our inner understanding, it never really quite settles. And for me, this is one of those things. Every time I see an old lady, I just think she's always been an old lady. Every time I see an old man with a walking stick sitting on a bench somewhere, especially two old men with cloth caps on and they're wearing old clothes or an old suit or something like that, I just think, well, I don't even think that they were born, but if I did, I would think they were born that way. But every old man and every old woman was born as a young child, and then, I don't know who said it, but maybe it was William Butler Yeats. No, actually, I bet you it was Oscar Wilde. I'll look it up and I'll put it on the screen. Oscar Wilde, then, let's say, he said, youth is wasted on the young. That sounds like one of those pithy statements, those little nuggets of, sort of chortle humour, which is a truth, but packaged in a sort of erudite little piece of whimsical humour. Youth is wasted on the young, and it is, because old people would love to have the energy and vitality and vigour of young people, and they would put their energy to good use, rather than all the follies and faux pas and mistakes that you make when you're young. And you would appreciate it more, for sure. So it's only when the body gets older and weaker and less, I suppose, springy and elastic and able to withstand the knocks that life gives you. And then, you'd be able to package maybe your youth and perhaps beauty, although I can't really say that in my case, but not trying to put myself down unnecessarily either, you know. I'm okay looking. To try and be objective as possible as I can, but it's difficult to look in the mirror and say, what am I really looking at here? You know, and how can I appraise myself, genuinely appraise myself, in other words, give myself an estimation of what my looks are. But when I smile, I have an idea that I probably look attractive enough, you know, gauging by people's reaction to me, you know. And what I've learned as well is that it's not necessarily so much about how you look, but how you make somebody feel about themselves. That is the kind of attraction, or that's how attraction works, I think, or that's closer to describing in a universal way how attraction works. It's not so much that people love you or adore you, but they love the feeling that you create about themselves and how they feel about themselves when they're around you. And I bet you a lot of people listening now might have noticed that when a very pretty girl over time reveals that she has quite an ugly and unpleasant personality, I think you might agree with me that she starts to look less and less attractive. Her face starts to look less pretty, for sure. She starts to take on, and I would even go as far as to say, an ugly appearance, you know. More than ugly, I can't quite think of the right word, but frightening, maybe. A repulsive or revolting appearance, even. And then I genuinely have found that sometimes girls that I thought like were, you know, just average or homely even, or not that good looking, maybe sometimes on a close-up then, when I see their face closer, I actually admire features about their face, and maybe I can also see an echo of their, not their youth exactly, because they might have still been young, but like just how cute they might have been when they were, you know, being pushed on a swing, or smiling when, you know, they got an ice cream, or just some happy moment in their youth, you know. So I mentioned William Butler Yeats, W.B. Yeats, because, you know, I've been thinking about, I suppose, more than one girl that I, as I say, my phrase is, you know, went out with, but it means, you know, have had a relationship of some romantic kind with. And, you know, what I realised was that, well, maybe I'll introduce this phrase now that I think about it. They were, you know, we talk about like sort of, you know, who do you marry, like, and who are you attracted to? And it's not, an aspect of it is that, I mean, although certainly guys hate to think about this, and I'm not saying that I agree with this even, but, you know, you model your relationships based on your parents in some way and their relationship. So that's, at least, I think, a way that isn't too shocking. And, you know, what happens in your childhood molds how you feel about yourself and how you feel about interacting with others and how others might interact with you. And so I'll say this phrase anyway, that a nice French girl, I was going to say woman, and, you know, she is woman, but this is the difficulty now at my age, because when you get to be what is middle-aged, or perhaps even beyond middle-aged, because I'm in my 40s now, and I don't want to say exactly how old, because I don't want to give the algorithm too much information about me, or very specific information. Nonetheless, anyway, getting back on topic, this nice French girl or woman said to me, and let me just try and get it right first time, she said, what we may... I'll try it again, I'll go for a second time. What we may not find in our youth, we may look for throughout our adult lives. So I'll try and say it again without stuttering. What we may not find in our youth, we may look for throughout our adult lives. I might put that up on the screen there, because I still don't feel I've done it justice. It was a very poignant way of putting something, I thought, a universal truth. And adults, really, as far as I'm concerned, I never started feeling like an adult, ever. And I think that might be quite a universal thing. And I think maybe people talked about this more often. that I perceived, my parents to be adults, and then, grannies and grandmothers and people of that age as over the hill and near death, and, I would see them, hanging around on park benches, or, doddering along, getting in everybody's way in the supermarket, or a lot I would see them in church doing, the rosary, which is, funny enough, it's related to the word rose, which is interesting, but I won't get into it now as far as religion goes. Rosicrucians and that kind of thing. An order of the rose. But anyway, it's when you go along they call the stations of the cross, and you say Hail Marys, and maybe you say a few other prayers like Our Father, and another prayer which I can't think of right now. And you just do this over and over again while clutching your rosary beads. And I just kind of thought, listen, if they're doing what they say is like, pleading indulgences and this kind of thing, and lighting candles and all that, I thought, like, if I was God, I'd be looking down on that. I'd be saying, listen, I'll have no Pascal wager people here, If you weren't praising me or, doing whatever you thought was necessary to get into heaven, don't bother starting now, because I don't like these sort of, well, listen, I'm getting old now, so better start sucking up to God type people, Anyway, I didn't mean to get deviated. Now, where was I? Okay, I forget why I mentioned rose, but anyway, how can I get back into it here? The beauty of every flower fades. Now, I just thought like that these people were always old, but in their minds, even the old grannies, they're still little girls. So the person inside the mind, it changes a bit. There is some youth. There is some experience on top of the youth that they once were. But they're still looking for somebody to love them, or somebody to make them feel nice about themselves, or good about themselves, or help take the pain away about things that they feel frightened about. And of course they're going to be feeling frightened about what's next, and is it going to be painful when I die, and who will remember me, and maybe if they didn't have children they might regret it, and if they did have children they might say, why don't my children visit me as often, or did they love me, or what was the purpose of it all? And maybe they're worried, maybe their children do love them and visit them, but they're worried about their future in a world that they might be getting ready to leave now soon. So while I'm looking at it here, this was another visual reminder, this buttercup. I will say another little childhood experience of mine. I must have been 10 years old, or maybe less, perhaps a little bit more. I'd say 10. There was a girl on my street, and I don't think I had her on the same road as I lived on, and I'm not sure if I'd interacted with her much. I don't know if she had gone to the same, I think it was, not sure if to call it elementary school, perhaps, up until about the age 7. Maybe she was in, I don't remember that. I think maybe she was, no, I tell you what it was, she must have moved into the road, and her parents had, obviously, and there was a couple of little parks or fields near us, and grassy areas, let's say, anyway, and there was some buttercups growing there, and well, she said to me, I think I was playing with my friends, maybe, I don't know, climbing a tree or whatever, and she said, I can tell if you like butter. And I thought, well, that's a non sequitur. Well, I didn't really think that, because I didn't know that word, but I sort of looked at it as if to go, well, no, you can't, and I don't know what would be the use of that anyway. And anyway, who doesn't really like butter, or why would it matter if you didn't? None of this seems relevant at all. So that was my sort of, I don't know, early science brain, or rational mind, part of my brain at least. And also, there was, for I don't know exactly where it came from, but a need that you felt you had to project the idea that you didn't care what girls thought or what they had to say, and that you weren't interested in them. You desperately, I think, for whatever reason, wanted to let on to your friends, make out, pretend to your friends that you didn't care what girls had to say, or do, or think, and you didn't care to be around them. But really, I was fascinated with them, and had been. I mean, the strange thing is that when I was 6 years old, sitting, because I don't even think I was 7 already, I remember the full name of the girl that I sat beside in school. And yeah, I definitely remember feeling really attracted to her, and I always wanted to sort of be sitting closer to her, and I don't know what it was that I thought that I was going to do once I got close to her. I'm pretty sure I was familiar with the concept of kissing, at least kissing on the cheek anyway. So maybe that's what I thought that I wanted to do. But see, it's more than that. It's not just like, why would that give anybody pleasure? If you think about these things and break them down, like, why would making a sucking with your mouth against somebody's cheek, what's like, if you think about all the conventions that we have and wonder how they came to be, how would that be a thing anyway? I suppose maybe it wouldn't take too long to formulate a theory as to why, but as far as what a baby does when it latches onto its mother's bosom for sustenance, maybe that's where this instinct or automatic type of motion or maneuver comes from. But anyway, so I'm just saying, these things, they're fairly primordial, but they don't come that often. It's not, you're in school, just sit up straight and pay attention, but even in school there was things like chasing and catch and kiss and that kind of thing. But I think normally it was the boys would do it to the girls, but then you wouldn't, I don't know, you'd be embarrassed then if you'd catch a girl, and you wouldn't want to use too much strength, and you certainly couldn't rugby tackle her. And if you might be too rough and maybe catch her leg and she fell, and then she started crying or scraped her knee or whatever, oh my god, you'd be in so much trouble. So it was a very fine line there you had to tread. And then occasionally it was the girls' chance to chase after the boys, and that was less common, and that should have been teaching us something then as well about the way that nature and life works. And but of course, even then at age 5, 6, 7, you pretended to your friends, oh my god, I was running and running, but you don't run quite as fast as you were able to, because you kind of do want to be caught, and then it'll be all the girl's fault if she kisses you, and you'll be able to then eventually break free and walk back or run back to your friends and act like as if you were caught by the Viet Cong or whatever, and managed to escape the torture that was happening to you, and then relay your war stories and say like, oh god, fellas, it was terrible, it was just icky, and she got me and she kissed me and slathered all over me, it was just horrible, whereas secretly, I don't know exactly, I mean, it'd be interesting to break it down why it is that you found it to be a pleasant experience, and you wanted it to happen again, but you didn't want to make out that that's what you wanted, because maybe as well you knew that if you actually sort of said, hey, to some girl, I would like you to do this, then maybe she'd say, well, I'm not that interested then, It's a funny thing, isn't it? Like, a girl might want to kiss you, but then if you say, oh yeah, I'd definitely be up for that, let's do that again and again and again, she might say, yeah, listen, I'm tired of this now, or maybe if you like it that much, I'm going to withhold some of it from you, or now I see how much you like it, that means I've got some commodity that I can meter out to you, if maybe you can do a couple of nice things for me, meter out as in like, portion out to you. So this girl, anyway, looking at this buttercup again, I'm going to see if I can get into focus for this story. Oh, it doesn't matter anyway. So she said to me, I can tell if you like butter or not. And I maybe grudgingly agreed, and went, okay, then let's see. And she went, no, come here, you have to follow me. And I was like, I'll tolerate this momentarily then. I don't know if I'm sounding like Niles or what was the other guy's name? Was his name Kramer? I can't remember. But anyway, those two brothers who lived in the apartment with their grouchy old father. I think it might have been a 90s sitcom. Anyway, she held the buttercup under my chin, and it sort of brushed against my skin, and I actually felt like the tickle of it, and I was still pretending like, that this is not amusing me in the slightest. This is very stupid, and I won't stand for it. And then she said, yeah, I can see there's a golden colour under your chin. Yeah, you definitely like butter. And I knew I did like butter, so I thought, wow, maybe this girl knows how to do something, because you know, maybe the reflection then, the way she's talking about it, maybe the reflection doesn't always appear. So if it did appear, and that does correlate with me liking butter, that does fit. Now, I wasn't, you know, thinking exactly in these very formulaic scientific terms, but I was sort of saying to myself, that does fit with a correlation then to an experiment that she has performed. I'd like to do some more experimentation. And I said, wow, what else can you do? And then she went, that's it, no, fine, bye, you can go now. You know, and I thought, oh no, I want to spend more time with this girl. And I realised that it was almost like a hypnotic trance that she had put me in, you know, but it made me feel good. I was relaxed. It was a moment that was so tranquil that I remember it to this day, and I remember her name. And maybe I will say her name. Her name was Linda. And the reason why I'll say her name is because there was a song by a group, I think perhaps it might have been in the 80s, maybe 90s. And I can't think of the name of the band, but I'll put it up on the screen if I can think of it. And it was called Looking Out for Linda. So just like that phrase, which I'll try another time now, what we may miss from our youth, we may look for throughout our adult lives. So the name of this song was Looking Out for Linda. So maybe for the rest of my adult life I've always been looking out for Linda, because I think she moved away then shortly afterwards again. I never saw her again. And as well as that, anyway, probably when I got a little bit older or became a teenager, I would have been probably too embarrassed to speak to her, you know. So I'll admit this, what I'm going around maybe in concentric circles is the idea that we never really stop being children, and in our minds, even though our bodies get older and older, the way we perceive each other changes. In one sense, we recognise that we're older and less attractive, but in another way, there is a certain aspect to somebody who has become older, and you associate that with a certain maturity then that means that you can have an emotional connection with them as well. Now at the same time, I am aware now, I have become aware that any unpleasant or adverse experiences that they have had, and we all have had in our youth, and we're likely to have had many more adverse reactions in our youth than we have had pleasant and tranquil reactions. It all colours the palette, and it all affects the person we are. So it changes us slightly, it adds baggage to the things that we carry, even if there is a person always at the centre that is unchanged. So we are the same, but the oxymoron or apparent contradiction is we're different. We shed our skin. Apparently all of our cells renew every month or a couple of months, certainly every year. Our hair grows, falls out, we cut it. Our skin sheds and flakes, and even our internal organs, our blood renews itself, things like that. So that applies to our brain as well, the place where allegedly our memories are kept. Even the physical entity that holds our memories, it is not the same physical entity as when we were children. And yet it holds memories. And perhaps they're not memories, that's why they're so malleable. That's why sometimes we're so uncertain of what really did happen when we were younger. We just have a feeling about it rather than an indelible memory, because we've had to copy the memories perhaps unconsciously, maybe when we dream, and move it around like a hard drive defragmenting itself, or maybe more like when a hard drive is about to no longer work as reliably and you get another hard drive or a solid state drive or whatever is the medium where you store your memories and you copy it from one to the other. But something is not exactly lost in the memory, but it's a bit like copying perhaps an old style vinyl record from one to the other, or you're copying the grooves from one to the other. Perhaps if you copy a key, maybe that's the best analogy. The new key will always be an approximation of the original key. Maybe it'll be sharper, but usually it's more blunt. The lines aren't as exactly delineated as they would have been around the key. There's a nice bee there. He's gone away, but he's not a bee. He's a small insect, and we're getting some pollen. Just got distracted there for a bit. So, our memories that we carry with us, are they who we are, the sum total of all of our memories? Or who are we really? And that's the ego death. When we realise that, okay, my memories will fade sometime. You know, if we have dementia or Alzheimer's, they'll go. And then who are we? You know, there is a character left at the end of it, but it's very little. And when we die, our memories die as well. Where do they go? And of course, you know, perhaps with the instinct to survive, we'll say, well, we want somebody to remember us, so I'll have to create some work of art to be remembered by. There's a poem called Ozymandias, which I'll leave till another time, but that's about this great king. I think he was Ramesses II, a pharaoh of Egypt, and he thought a big statue of his would last the ages. But just sticking to the idea of this other poem by W.B. Yeats, and it's called Among School Children. And I'll mention an adverse incident that a girl who I loved very much, and I say girl, but when I met her, of course, she was a woman. And in fact, I think she was older than 40. I think she might have been 41, perhaps even 42. And so it seems ridiculous, perhaps to some people's ears, to call her a girl. She was very well preserved, I will say, for her age. And but you know, she knew that she wasn't as young and as pretty as she was, although she was very pretty. And I think it was clear, a lot of people could tell she was attractive, you know, attractive still. But she knew that she wasn't as youthful as she was, and you know, she used to say things to me like, well, she used to remind me about how she used to be a gymnast, and tell me that's how she's kept still in such good shape and that kind of thing. And of course, you know, that was a lead-in to me, like even if she wouldn't consciously admit it, that was a lead-in to me to sort of praise her and remind her, tell her how good-looking she still was and how youthful she still was and how supple her body still was for her age, you know. But of course, how do you say that if you qualify it with a 4-year age? You're not going to get the reaction. You're going to get, you know, a reaction of being affronted or insulted. So I kind of think, you know, from what I learned was just don't say anything really, like just kind of go, yeah, you know. But I understood it for what it was, you know. A certain self-consciousness, which we all have, you know. And that's the funny thing, you know. In her mind, she's self-conscious about how I perceive her, and of course I'm self-conscious. No matter how long I was going out with her for, I was self-conscious about, you know, how she perceived me, and did she still love me, and was she still as enamoured with me as when she first met me, and that kind of thing, you know. So inside our own minds, we're all as, well, maybe the exterior doesn't reflect very much about the interior, or it hides a lot, for sure, you know. And in her mind, I remember, you know, we had a, of course, like all people do who have relationships, we had not exactly an argument, but we had a falling out, you know. And of course, I was right, but nonetheless, you know, saying that with a little bit of humour, of course, you know, or you know, I'm putting heavy iron on it. But look, there were certain things in our relationship, certain things that I did, or ways that I behaved that I would take back and change if I could now, but you can't. And certain things you have to just let go and put it down to experience. But she had acted a certain way, and I said that's not right, and you know it isn't, and I won't pretend that it is. And it took her a while to admit it, but she did eventually. But she started crying anyway, and I didn't want to, you know, make it a long drawn out apology where I had to sort of, you know, put her on the rack to make her suffer about it, if you know what I mean, like twist her, you know, arm to sort of make her cry. Because previously to that, not immediately previously, but she had told me a few months maybe prior to that about how her grandmother had died, and it was in a very tragic way. And maybe I will say this, maybe, okay, skip forward 30 seconds if you think that you might not like to hear something unpleasant. She told me about how her grandmother who lived next door to her, had died in a house fire, and how the fire was so intense, the heat of the fire, that her bedroom window, the glass in it, cracked. And it had cracked, I suppose, like safety glass, where there was all these different shards, and the light of the fire and then distant screaming woke her up, and she was about 3 years old. And that memory, as you might imagine, stayed with her for the rest of her life. So I knew that this was something that was under the surface, not buried too far. So when she was crying or weeping, and I could see that she was essentially a woman who was older than, I'll say this, right, even though I don't want to juxtapose the two in my own head too much, but hopefully it won't be too much of an unpleasant thought for you, but I remember when my mother said to me, "Well, I'm 40 now, son, but isn't your mother still a very youthful looking mother?" And I mean, they say 40 is the new 30. So, you know, you can be very proud of your mum, can't you? And, you know, you can tell all your friends like that your mom is a very young looking mother. I went, "Ugh, what are you talking about, Mum? You're ancient." "No, you're not. I mean, have you seen yourself in the mirror? Like, how could you think you look young?" I mean, words to that effect. Maybe it wasn't exactly as cruel, but it was words to that effect. And I really regret saying that, and I wish that I could have been a little bit more tactful. And again, that speaks to me, who I thought once I was born that everything was about me, and that my parents were always my parents and always would be. And to this day, even, I still find it difficult to, but I find it easier though, but there was a time when I couldn't even conceive of them being people in their own right. And that's the thing. So, I mean, if you see old women, who I perceive to be like sort of, 70 or 80, maybe even 60, who knows, but there's plenty of people who are 60 who will think of themselves as still relatively young. And I know there's plenty of people who are 60, and I've said, "Listen, I'm getting old now," and they say, "What are you talking about? You're a whippersnapper still." And yet I know now there's plenty of people who are in their 20s, and they think that they're getting a bit old now, but they think they're their youth, and they think they know it all, and they know nothing. They barely, as a friend of mine once said, who was, well, a lot older than me, he said they barely know they're born. No, I'm trying to put on his accent. They barely know they're born. They're not that long out of nappies at all, or out of diapers, So that's the thing, you see. And maybe I've let this go on too long, and I'll leave reading and analysing a little bit, or explaining a little bit, for want of a better word. Not explaining, but just highlighting a few parts of a poem by William Butler Yeats that speaks to this. Because I know some people these days, we've all been trained to immediately sort of, when you start talking about, I suppose, little girls and then old women and then everything in between, people might start saying, "Oh, don't start conflating too many things too haphazardly there, or you might land yourself in trouble." You see what I mean? There's a difference between reflecting on the stages of life and other things, and I hope people can appreciate that. And I think the fear that they put into us, like everything, there are legitimate fears and cautions to be had, but at the same time, I think that they use this fear to arrest our thoughts before they could even begin, so that we can't examine the things that are necessary to examine in order to make some sense of life. So, as I say anyway, when, I had maybe not been speaking to this girl who I loved very much for something like 3 days, because I expected her to figure out that she was wrong and come up with her apology, uncoaxed, uncajoled, that I shouldn't need to get out the whiteboard and draw, thought bubbles and arrows between them, and prove to her in a series of inductive pieces of logic that, yes, indeed, she had erred, in other words, E-R-R-E-D, in other words, gone wrong somewhere, and needed to make amends, and, well, certainly first of all acknowledge it, and then make an apology, and then, make amends. In other words, try to put it right, and then endeavour to never do it again, and learn from it. I didn't want to have to, drag that out and make it a long drawn process, because look, even if sometimes girls do put on the waterworks, I had to think that maybe in her mind, what I was looking at here was a woman who I thought of as my girlfriend, So she was a girl, and it's strange, that we all feel, I think, it's difficult to think of the right terms. Like, do you really call somebody a boyfriend when he's over 40? And I don't like the word partner. It just doesn't sound right to me. And all these other words you might think of. I don't really know if this is the right word, but... And I suppose sometimes you don't want to say the words that sound a bit too icky, I'll say, right? But are perhaps the best descriptors, like somebody I love. And anyway, it pained me to see her in such pain, and to imagine that although I was looking at this girl who, perhaps her body wasn't as sprightly and youthful as it once was, it still looked pretty good to me. And I loved her face. And for me, it's really always been the beauty is in the face, Now, obviously, you don't want somebody who's, let their body go too much, and doesn't look after themselves in any way at all, and is a real slob or whatever, Anyway, but for me, I was just falling in love with a girl's face, really, They always say, like, so are you a this man or a that man, a leg man, And for me, it's just always been about the face, And when I saw her face and she was crying, and I know sometimes girls can be good at putting on the waterworks or doing a bit of overacting, if not acting, but I just had to sort of say, listen, stop being cruel to somebody you love, If she really genuinely is so distraught, and maybe in her mind, somewhere that's contributing to this is the distress that she was under when she was, I don't know, I think maybe she said she was 3 years old. And this happened to her grandmother, and she was bewildered, and the adults wouldn't explain to her what had happened properly, because I suppose they felt this would upset her even more. But what did upset her then was the lying or the hiding of the truth, and she wanted to know where was her granny and why she couldn't see her. And the suspicion of what it was that happened, and the anger that was mixed up with why she wasn't told, and why she wasn't being treated like somebody who deserved to know the truth. And I suppose part of the reason why she loved me was because I had shown her something that she didn't get much of perhaps in her youth, which was, and again, I don't mean to say it in this way, but hopefully you can understand, like, not a replacement for her father or a father figure, because people don't like to think of things in that way when you're going out with somebody. I wasn't any more than a few years older than her. A couple of years older than her. What she got from me, not to put it in such transactional terms, but one of the things that I suppose made her feel good about herself when she was around me was that she was receiving some amount of comfort and care that in another type of relationship a father would give to his daughter, if you understand what I'm saying. And that's why I've done my best there. Well, maybe it's not my best, but I think I've tried to put some effort into describing it in such a way where I hope people can see that it's not in the kind of, salacious type of, awful way that people might immediately leap to thinking about that. I think we probably have been conditioned to think about relationships like that in those kind of terms. But, we all look for feelings of security. And the funny thing is that for men as well, I'll say this, and I don't think there's many men that would be willing to admit this, but I think a lot of men who were boys and still are, in their minds, they look for, although they might not even realise it consciously, some kind of, not exactly a maternal figure, but the quality that the mother gives, so it's some comfort. It's, there's another song, like, everybody needs a bosom for a pillow. That was Brimful of Asha. Another song that I think was out in the 90s, so a nice, soft place to rest your head. So I think every guy loves, but maybe they won't admit it. And for me, I'll say, I think I love it just as much, a woman's soft embrace, as much as anything else, and the feeling of comfort. And it's perhaps something that, you didn't get as much of, or maybe even if you got plenty of it, you always want more. So it makes you feel that you're warm and nurtured and comforted when you need it, somebody who loves you and adores you and dotes on you, other than your mother, who has to because that's her job, and then equally the woman loves feeling that she is being protected and reassured and comforted, and that makes her feel good about herself too. And the funny thing is this girl and another girl had said it to me as well that I went out with before her. They both had said to me, sort of apropos of nothing, that they really loved how I loved them unconditionally. And I think I might have let it go in both occasions. Certainly in this occasion I did, because shortly after comforting her and thinking that maybe somewhere inside her, she was crying the tears of the little girl who missed her grandmother and was so traumatized by her death and the manner of her passing, that when she said to me, and she had told me as well about how, she'd told me different things about her father, and I'm not going to any very unpleasant places, but she seemed to have an admiration for her father, but also a strong dislike for her father. So it was a contradiction again. And that's the way human relationships are typically, that you like aspects of somebody and you don't like aspects of the person as well. And they are reflections of you too, and how they interact with your own personality and how these things make you feel about yourself as they reflect personality traits, qualities or things that aren't really such good qualities about yourself that you might recognize in others. But as I thought that maybe she was crying perhaps some remnant tears of that trauma, I didn't feel it was appropriate to say, well, hold on a minute, I don't love you unconditionally. My love is conditional on how you treat me as well, and the way that you express your love for me, and how you make me feel about myself. And that is what I think adult love needs to be understood to be from the outset by both people. That the love for each other is conditional on the good manner in which they treat each other or not. And that might be still in the realm of the infatuation part of love, the being in love rather than loving somebody on a deeper level. And there are deeper levels of love as well, which I think can encompass things like respect and admiration and appreciation for each other and the things that they do and the ideas that they stand for and the principles that they have, that they carry with them through thick and thin. And I think that's why then a deeper love can grow out of something, but sometimes the superficial and the more long-lasting love can maybe coincide, or one gives way to the other, or one feeds into the other. But that's why perhaps just the infatuation part can never last unless there is something deeper. And that's why sometimes as well, two people who aren't instantly attracted to each other can develop something, which I think was a relationship that Maude Gonne, this society lady, who apparently was a great youth, or great beauty in her youth. But for me, when I learned about this poem, and it was called Among School Children, when William Butler Yeats was in his 60s and he went to inspect a school as part of his duties as some kind of inspector of education when he became a senator, that he saw all these bright young faces and little girls and boys, and he looked at a little girl and wondered to himself, like, so now this woman or this girl who I once really loved, she's now an old lady. And from my point of view, I saw a black and white photograph of him and a black and white photograph of her, and I thought, ugh, they're old people and they're dead now. How could they possibly be young and good looking? That's disgusting. But this is the trick, you see, that Mother Nature plays on us all. Youth gives way to wisdom, but old age then gives way to youth. And this is the cycle of life again. So again, I'm conscious that this is getting very long, and I'm just checking again to see if this is still recording, and it's fairly bright sunlight against my phone here. I'll admit it's my phone, and I can't really see how long it's been recording. So I think I will have to leave the reading of the poem and the analysis of it till another time, because that's likely to go on quite a while too. But maybe that's as good as a lead-in to it. And then I can speak more about it during the poem. And maybe come back to a few things that I might have forgotten to mention. But so this is the thing, you see. Even old ladies now, in their minds, they're still little girls. And me, I'm now a middle-aged man, but I'm still a boy in my mind. And I still don't even think of myself as an adult, because I presumed that adults knew about the world and knew about everything and were sure about who they were as much as everything else in the world. But you never are, really, you know. And so that's definitely a point I want to make and try to get across to people, even though, of course, when I was young, many people tried to tell me, but maybe that's all you can do. Leave a message in a bottle like this. A digital bottle, if anybody would ever find it in the future. This was the year 2001. Summer 2000, sorry, not 2001, oh my god. This was the summer of 2021. I'm not going to mention the things that were in the news right now, but they were lying to us, like they'll be lying to you then, and like they lied to everybody in the past always about everything. But the message I want to leave to you is that nobody knows what they're doing, but you assume that they do, and some other people then not only pretend that they do, but some people are doing it in order to fool you, to take advantage of you, and others are just doing it because, look, they feel like you wouldn't understand even if they explained it to you, and they also probably don't want to frighten you by coming up to you and acting what you might assume to be out of character. Because everybody expects an old man to act like an old man, and everybody expects an old lady to act like an old lady. And a middle-aged man to act sensible and mature, and a middle-aged woman to act motherly and, you know, not let her hair down and have a glass of wine with the girls and act like she's still, you know, a gossipy teenager. You see, that's the thing. We're all children, and we barely have lifetimes long enough to grow out of it. And if they were any longer, you would continuously forget everything that you'd learnt. That's another thing. By the time that I get to be much older, I'll probably have forgotten all these little insights. And also, I think one of the things that happens to a lot of the older people is that they're less and less incentivized to tell people anything. Or to help anybody, because they kind of feel like, look, my prerogative here is to look after myself, to try and make my death a little bit less painful, and to try and maybe take some comfort with myself in my old age, you know.